designs was considered. Final plans call for a complex of low-level buildings surrounding two 1,350-foot towers, the tallest ever built. Their great height was made possible by the use of load-bearing walls. Meanwhile, orders were placed for the 200,000 tons of steel which would be needed for construction. Individual pieces were prefabricated and rarely interchangeable. Moreover, there would be no room to stockpile materials at the construction site. This created a tremendous logistical problem. Steel sections would have to arrive at the site in the exact order and at the exact time needed. To meet this challenge, Port Authority engineers used a computerized system known as Critical Path Method, or CPM. CPM would coordinate every aspect of construction, track the flow of materials, and minimize any delays. The exterior walls were designed to bear much of the weight of the towers, as well as all the wind loads.
dead included 343 firemen. This was the single worst one-day loss in the department's history. It created 244 widows. More than 606 children of firefighters lost a parent.
Extremely tall buildings were traditionally inefficient, since huge amounts of interior space were taken up by structural supports and elevators. The Trade Center towers would overcome this problem. The exterior walls were designed to bear much of the weight of the towers, as well as all the wind loads. The only internal supports would be in a central core of columns. Elevators would be placed in the shafts formed by the core columns.
Lurches outwards
In part to
and falls.
conserve space, the towers would be organized into three zones.
As it does so, a quarter of an hour dislodges many more floor trusses. All the conditions for the collapse of the South Tower were in place. The floors they were holding cascade down with a force too great to be withstood. The top third of the building was bearing. The result is what's called a progressive collapse, as each floor pancakes down onto the one below.
In 2002, NOVA depicted a scenario envisioned by many experts at the time, that the truss connections failed in the extreme heat, causing the floors to fall onto one another, precipitating the collapse.
Inside,
but as they studied the minute details of the collapse, they made a remarkable discovery.
Some were starting to soften
One that would not only provide a final verdict on the trusses,
to the columns,
but would completely revise previous theories of how the towers fell.
When you did it previously, you showed that the floors actually pancaked. And we did not see any evidence of pancaking in the videos or photographs we have.
During a fire, okay, they start exerting tension forces because it becomes
now to talk about the events of that
those two little
and
bolts
tragic
just
day, Dr.
couldn't
Gene
handle it.
Corley led the federal investigation into the collapse of the Twin Towers, also a certified and licensed structural engineer. Dr. Corley, thanks for being with us.
I am glad to be with you.
So, you know, we could spend all night getting into the details of your report, but in a nutshell, what did your investigation find out about why those buildings fell?
If too many
Well,
failed,
what we found was that although the airplanes did a terrific amount of damage when they were not the sole cause for the towers coming down. finally caused them to come down was the fires that burned in the buildings after the planes hit. The fires weakened the steel to the point that finally each building collapsed.
I said, those are steel structures. I said, that's furniture and paper and carpeting and draperies and things like that that are burning.
Doctor, wouldn't that be due to the jet fuel? That's what a lot of people are saying, the jet fuel burned so hot. But why would the buildings collapse if where the planes hit and the jet fuel was up at the top of the building?
Well, okay, let me start at the beginning there. First of all, jet fuel does burn hotter than other fuels, although there were plastics and things like that in the buildings which also do burn very hot. But the jet fuel, we calculated, was all burned up within 3 to 9 minutes. So the jet fuel started the fire, but it was not the only cause for the fire. It was the later fire of the contents of the building that finally brought them down.
597. What do you got up there, Chief? Assuming voice stairway, 74th floor, no smoke or fire problem. The walls are breached, so be careful. Yeah, 10-4, I saw that on 68. All right, we're on 71, we're coming up behind you. 10th floor, this floor to go. Let me know when you see fire.
In 2002, Congress charged the National Institute of Standards and Technology to conduct the most detailed building analysis ever undertaken. The biggest hurdle for the NIST team was the lack of physical evidence they had to work with.
For most investigations, you usually have a building to investigate. So we had to recreate in great detail what happened on 9/11, and that's why the need for a painstaking reconstruction of the entire process.
They looked at 1,000 hours of videotape, meticulously measuring the visible damage. They tracked temperatures inside the buildings.
World Trade Center, wondering if the building above them was safe. But the nightmare went on and on. And it was all live on American television. First, one of the towers collapsed.
Thanks very much. Completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking about.
Exactly. The second building that we witnessed the airplane enter.
"70 feet up at street level, steel trees were put into place around the perimeter of the tower. These trees would transfer the load of the exterior wall to the more widely spaced columns now anchored to bedrock. Construction of the towers could now proceed at great speed. 3 basic elements were used: 2 or 3-story high sections for the load-bearing wall, massive steel beams for the core column, and floor sections to span the 60 feet between core and wall. Through the complex orchestration of these structural elements, 3 floors could be constructed in 10 days.
Officials said they had 4,000 got there and there was literally nothing but paper, dust, steel. That's it. Nothing. There was no indication that anything had ever been in those buildings. Nothing. I mean, you didn't come across a computer, a file cabinet, a desk. There had to be thousands of bathrooms. Nothing. It was the nothingness just struck me that this isn't good.
Sir, outstanding group of young people. Another outstanding group, a heroic group, rescuers at the World Trade Center who face a grim and difficult job today as they work around the clock searching for any signs of life. NBC's Soledad O'Brien was at the site late Wednesday and she joins us this morning. Soledad, good morning.
And good morning to you, Katie. Right now, we're just about 6 blocks away from what's being called Ground Zero. And there's a series of checkpoints that have been set up to keep everybody out, except for essential personnel. Obviously, as you get closer to the building, the smoke is thicker, the air is more difficult to breathe. As you mentioned, we went in to talk to some of the rescuers. Some of them have been on the job now for 46 plus hours. They are exhausted, but they're not giving up. Escorted by paramedics, we carry just a digital video camera and a small disposable camera. The first thing we see, what remains of the North Tower. It's where firefighters initially responded to a plane crash. It became much more. A pedestrian bridge blown apart, burnt out emergency vehicles. Today's fire crews in a futile attempt to put out the rest of the burning shell of the tower, knowing that those first rescuers on the scene, hundreds of them, lay trapped somewhere inside. A block south, we come upon the other tower and an army of firefighters, police officers, National Guardsmen, and volunteers. It is a monumental effort on a mountain of steel and glass and pulverized concrete. They pass pieces of the building's skeleton, hand over hand in a human chain, collecting evidence in a crime scene 3 blocks wide. We see trauma surgeons, EMTs, and paramedics, but they're standing, waiting, on the edge of the disaster. There are few rescues and so nothing to do. Instead, just grim discoveries, body parts instead of bodies. To us, the amount of work that lies ahead is overwhelming, and the danger still very real. The heaps of debris are smoldering, surrounding buildings are badly damaged or gutted, and possibly unstable. And yet, many rescuers tell us this is personal. They're looking for their friends, their colleagues, and in some cases, members of their own family. One officer called to duty minutes after the South Tower was hit told me that his brother, one of the first firefighters to respond, has not been heard from since. And that officer says he's going to stay on the spot where his brother was last seen. It really is a heartbreaking story. Many of the comrades, obviously firefighters, EMTs, and police officers, hopeful that they'll be able to at some point be called in to rescue their fallen brothers and sisters, but at this time it looks a little bit hopeless. Katie, back to you.
So many sad, sad stories, Soledad. Thank you so much.
Probably the worst thing I ever saw in my life. We never in a million years thought we were going to end up where we did. And what we saw, the devastation that we saw was just unbelievable. We just couldn't, you'd never be able to explain it to anybody. It was just terrible.
One place to begin the search for answers is among piles of charred and twisted steel, now lying in a scrapyard in New Jersey.
Cladding up there that looks like it.
Gene Corley is leading a team from the American Society of Civil Engineers investigating the precise causes of the collapse. Corley led the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing disaster. But the magnitude and relevance of this investigation is daunting.
I have looked at now 2 major terrorist attacks, and I never want to look at another one in the future. I want the findings that we have obtained from these studies to be used to develop buildings that will...
As they search the visual record for the precise moment and trigger for the South Tower collapse, engineers Gene Corley and Bill Baker found crucial evidence in video shot by a nearby firm of architects.
Looks like parts of the core are still showing.
It reveals that much of the central core remained momentarily intact when the outer walls fell. If the core remained standing, something else must have triggered the collapse.
Starts to collapse, spreads over to here, and the top of the building now is on its way down.
These pictures show that the south tower fell away from the impact wall and toward the side where the fire had concentrated. To the team, this suggested a particular mechanism for the collapse, which the video helped confirm. The plane slammed along the eastern wall, starting a fierce fire in the northeast corner, severely damaging many of the steel columns in this area. The heat of the fire would have softened both the floor trusses and the outer columns they were attached to. When the steel became weak, the trusses would have collapsed. And without the trusses to keep them rigidly in place, the columns would have bent outward and then failed.
As you start to lose the lateral support due to the floors, the exterior just crumples like a piece of paper, or like if you took a sheet of cardboard and you put some weight on it and you take out the lateral supports.
For the first time since the Gulf War, the Pentagon is considering calling up military reserves, an apparent prelude to a concentrated and long-term effort to hunt down and punish terrorist organizations around the world. David Martin reports.
We'll go after that group, that network, and those who have harbored, supported, and aided that network to rip the network up.
U.S. officials say they are drafting plans to attack not just bin Laden, but the Taliban rulers of Afghanistan who allow him to operate from their territory, either killing bin Laden and destroying his camps, or forcing the Taliban to turn him over. And, said Powell, that's not all.
Through that network, we will continue with a global assault against terrorism in general.
Began studying what was left of the World Trade Center.
These were hollow sections.
It's been around up there.
This would be an interesting piece for the fire guys.
Yeah, well.
Tasked by the federal government to try to determine what caused the collapse, the team was given 6 months to come up with some answers.
Part of the column extended from floor 39 to 41.
The group's leader was Eugene Corley, whose experience with the Oklahoma City attack made him a logical choice for lead investigator. After several months of intensive study, the American Society of Civil Engineers delivered its verdict.
The buildings we found performed well, and there was no trade-off of safety for economy and construction. It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire that caused collapse.
For the first time today, Secretary of State Colin Powell has confirmed that the U.S. has Osama bin Laden and his terror network in its sights.
We will go after that network and those who have supported and aided that network to rip the network up.
These buildings were sound, well-designed, highly innovative, and there was nothing that could have changed the outcome. And there was nothing that could have changed the outcome.
And there is universal support for the American people, sadness in their voice, but understanding that we have just seen the first war of the 21st century.
That we have just seen the first war of the 21st century.
That we have just seen the first war of the 21st century.